We continue now at the top of Daf Kuftes Vav Amud Beis Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 115b. The Gemara here is in the middle of explaining a brisa. The brisa was dealing with a situation of Mayim Shein Lehem Sof, where we had a situation where men died in water and it was impossible to see the shores. In general, we usually don't believe Eidim in such a situation when they say that the husband died, because again, there's no evidence. It could be the husband came up somewhere from the water and we weren't able to see. And so the Gemara now is explaining the brisa. The case over here is that they're actually testifying v'chazinu la'alter. They actually saw immediately, they saw the corpses of these individuals that had drowned. The case again in the brisa was that we're relying on the testimony of women, but they're now telling you simonim, they're telling you signs that identify that these bodies actually belong to these particular individuals, and therefore in such a case we're not really relying on them at all, we're actually relying on the simonim. Rashi over here says, simonim dilav simonim chayshinan dil ma'acherim ninu. If not for the simonim, we might actually be concerned that these are other individuals. Because the water is able to change the way that the faces look, and it's not so clear. So in any case, the point is this has nothing to do with relying on the testimony of one witness or any witnesses. It has to do with relying on the simonim. And the Gemara continues, there was a story of a person who deposited sesame by his friend. Amarlei said to him, Havli shumshami, give me back the sesame. Amarlei said to him, Shaklasinu, you already took them, I already gave it back to you. So the person said back, I'll prove to you that it's mine. It was this exact amount, and it's in that particular barrel. Go check, you'll see that identifies that this is mine. Amarlei, so the person said back to him, no, didach shaklasinu, you took yours, and the ones that you're talking about in the barrel, that belongs to someone else. So Savar Rav Chisda Lamemer, Rav Chisda thought to say, Hainu Shnei Talmidei Chacham. It's the exact same thing as the case of the two Talmidei Chacham who drowned, that previous brisa we were just discussing. And over there, V'lo Amrinan Hanach Azlu La'alma V'hani Achrini Ninu. When the women, the Eidim, when they testify and they say that these men are the same men, we don't say, well, no, these are actually other men that look the same. We don't say that. We say once they have simanim, we assume it's the same men, and the same thing should be true over here. Once the person is able to provide a siman of how much exact shumshami there is, that shows that it's his. And so the Gemara continues, Amarle Rava, so Rava said back to him, to Rav Chisda, mi dami, can you really compare it? Hasam kamri simanim, over there when we talked about the individuals who drowned, they had actual simanim, that clearly identifies that these are those particular individuals. Hacha shumshami, my simone islu, but when you're talking about sesame, there's no real simanim by sesame, you can't identify one sesame from another one. Udukamar kain v'chein havin, and the fact that he said that it's this amount of sesame, Amor chushbana, you can just say that the amount he happened to guess correctly, but that's not really considered a real siman. You cannot compare these two cases. And the Gemara continues, Amar lei Mar Kashisha bar Rav Chisda le Rav Ashi. Mar Kashisha bar Rav Chisda said to Rav Ashi, Umichai shinon shema pinon, but are we really concerned that maybe these items were moved? In other words, in this case, we're saying that when the person deposited the shumshami, maybe these aren't the same ones, maybe those ones were moved, and these are other ones. Vatanan, but we learned in a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Matzah kli v'chasav olav kuf. Let's say a person finds a vessel, and it has the letter kuf on it. We can assume the contents of that kli are carbon, they're part of a carbon, they're part of hektish. Mem, let's say it has a mem on it, meiser, we can assume it's meiser. Dalit, if it has a dalit, dimua, then we can assume it's dimua. Rashi says, what's dimua? Chulin u'truma shenesarvu, meaning it's a mixture of chulin and truma. Ve'nechol el kohen, it has to be something that can only be eaten by a kohen. Tes, tevel, if it has a tes on it, you can assume the contents are tevel. Tuf, truma, if you see a tuf on it, you can assume the contents are truma. Shebeshas, hasakona, hayakosvin tuf, tachas truma, because in the times of danger, they would write a tuf instead of truma, etc. They would use these various letters to symbolize what was in the vessel. And so you see from this Mishnah that we're not concerned that anything was moved out of the vessel and that this is something else. So the same thing should be true when it comes to the shumshami. There should be no concern that the original ones were moved out and these were replaced. But the Gemara continues, Amarle Ravina Rav Ashi, but Ravina said back to Rav Ashi, V'lo chashin and shema pinon, are we not concerned that the contents of a vessel may have been switched? Amos Sefer, let's look at the end of the very same Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi Omer, it says that Rabbi Yossi says, Afilu matzah chavis v'chasav ala truma, even if you find a barrel and it has the word truma on it, not just a tuf. So harei elu chulin, we say that might be chulin. Shani Omer ishtaket havim moli truma, because I might say that last year it had truma in it. Upinan, it was cleared out. So on the contrary, you see the exact opposite from the end of the Mishnah. Alma. And so the Gemara says, Ella rather to Kuli Alma Chayshinan Shemapina. And really, in all situations, we would be concerned that maybe the contents have been switched. But over here in this Mishnah, they're arguing, meaning Rabbi Yossi and the Tanakama are arguing about the following issue. One says that if it was true that the contents were switched, then they would have erased whatever letter, whatever indication was on the vessel. And the other one will say, and so Rabbi Yossi will say that maybe the person forgot, that's ishtaluya ishtali, he forgot to erase the mark on the vessel, or maybe on purpose he left the mark over there because that way people would leave it alone. If they would think it was truma, they wouldn't touch it. It was a way of preserving the contents of the vessel. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Yitzchak Reish Galusa bar Achosid Rabbevi Havi. Yitzchak Reish Galusa, he was the son of the sister of Rabbevi. Kazal mi Kurtova l'Aspamia. He was traveling from Kurtova to Aspamia. V'shachav, and he died on the road. So Shalchu Mehasam, so they sent a message from over there. They said, Yitzchak Reish Galusa, Yitzchak was the exilarch, bar Achosid Rabbevi, who was the son of the sister of Rabbevi. Havekazal mi Kurtova l'Aspamia. He was going from Kurtova to Spain. V'shachav, and he died. And so the question was as follows: are we concerned that there might be two people with the same name or not? Do we assume that this is the individual and that this person's wife can in fact remarry? Or maybe there's someone else with the same name and there's really some confusion over here. And so the Gemara continues, Abaye Amar Chayshinan. Abaye says that we do have this concern. Rav Amar Lo Chayshinan, and Rava says there is no such concern. And Rashi over here says, Mi Chayshinan L'Trei Yitzchak Heichad Lo Huchzak U'Shnei Yosef Ben Shimon Birachas. If we don't already have a chazaka that there's two people with the same name, do we have such a concern? Rav Amar Lo Chayshinan. Rava says, no, we have no concern. Because there's no chazaka that way. Now, if there's a chazaka that there's two people with the same name, that would be a different situation, and Rava would admit that it is a concern. But otherwise, Rava says there is no such concern. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaye says, Minoa Minola. So from where can I show you that we do have such a concern? Because there was once a get that was found in Nahardoi. Rashi over here says, the woman is standing, the wife is standing, she's showing us this get, and she wants to remarry. And the get said as follows, Bitzad Klunya Masa, at the Klunya side of the city, the colonial side of the city, Ano Adrulinoi, Nahardoi I, and the person's name was Adrulinoi, Petaris V'Sarachis Yasplonis Intasi, I'm divorcing, I'm separating from so-and-so, my wife. And so the father of Shmuel sent this case in front of Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya. And so he sent back a message, the whole Nardoi has to be inspected. You have to make sure there's no one else with the same name. Rashi over here says, you got to find out if there's anyone else named Adrulinoi except for this person who's the husband of this wife. And so you see from this story that apparently we do have such a concern. But the Gemara continues, Rava responds to this proof of Rav Amar, and Rava says, if there was really such a concern, they should be checking the entire world for someone named Andrulinoi. Rashi over here says, maybe there was some guy named Andrulinoi in Nardoi, and maybe he left that area. If you really had such a concern, you should check the whole world. Ela mishum kevodo. Rather, the only reason why he sent back that message to check the area of Nardoi was just for his honor. In other words, kevodo de'avu de Shmuel hu de shalach achi. We wanted to respect the father of Shmuel. The fact that the father of Shmuel asked the question, he didn't want to respond, there's no concern whatsoever. So he wanted to legitimize his question a little bit. So he said, you know what? Check the whole Nardoi for such an individual. Rashi says, mishum kevodo shelo lachziko ketoa v'shoel davar shein tzarich. He didn't want to make it look like the father of Shmuel had asked a question for no reason whatsoever. So he sent back this message to check Nardoi to see if there was anyone named Andrulinoi, but really, that's not really necessary. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava. Rava says, Manoa Amina Lo, where can I prove that we do not have such a concern? Tehanu Trei Shtore de Nafkim Mechuza. There were these two documents that went out in Mechuza, Uchsibuhu Chavi Bar Nanoi, V'Nanoi Bar Chavi, and the names that were in the documents were Chavi Bar Nanoi and Nanoi Bar Chavi. V'Agbi Buhu, Rava Bar Avu, and Rava Bar Avu, he collected with these documents, Zuzi, he collected money with these documents. And so now Rava brings the proof, Chava Bar Nanoi, V'Nanoi Bar Chavi, B'Mechuza, Shchichi Tuva. But those names names, Chavi bar Nanoi and Nanoi bar Chavi, are very common in Mechuzah. Rashi over here says, Shchichi tuva v'afilachim agvina. Nevertheless, apparently we're collecting with Ishtaras, Kishamotz Ishtar Choval Acherim. V'lo chayshinan shama acher hay. Apparently we're not afraid that it's somebody else. V'kevan delinyan memon afagav dehuchzagu lo chayshinan. The way Rashi explains, since in a monetary case, even though we know there are people with the same names and we're not concerned, so l'inyan isura, when it comes to a situation of iser, ki lo huchzaku mi lo chayshinan. At least if there's no chazaka, we shouldn't be concerned, meaning if there's no chazaka that there's someone with the same name, it should seem that there is no concern. And the Gemara continues via Abaya. How does Abaya respond to Rav? And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kufta Zayin Amud Aleph.